What if I told you that one of the biggest career mistakes ever broadcast live to millions turned a struggling man into a global icon? This is the shocking story of how Steve Harvey, in front of the entire world, made the mistake that should have ended his career, yet somehow it made him unstoppable. Stay tuned, because by the end, you'll see why failure might just be the best thing that ever happens to you. Steve Harvey wasn't born into fame, money, or comfort. He was born Broderick Stephen Harvey in 1957 in Welch, West Virginia, the son of a coal miner. Growing up poor in America's Rust Belt wasn't glamorous, but what Steve did have was something most his early years were filled with struggle. He worked as a carpet cleaner, a mailman, an insurance salesman, jobs that had nothing to do with comedy, nothing to do with television. He bombed his first comedy show. He was booed. People told him he'd never make it. But instead of letting those voices kill him, he decided to double down. He once said, "Failure is a part, little did he know that." By the late 1990s, Steve Harvey had become a household name in comedy. His sitcom, The Steve Harvey Show, made him a familiar face. He joined the original Kings of Comedy tour with Bernie Mac, Cedric the Entertainer, and D.L. Hewley, turning into one of the most recognized comedians of his generation. He was hosting radio shows, appearing on TV, and building a loyal fan base. People loved him for being raw, funny, and authentic. He was never afraid to say what was on his mind, even if it made people uncomfortable. But by the 2010s, his career was at a crossroads. He wasn't the hottest comedian anymore. The comedy scene had shifted, the media had changed. He was still working hard, but the global spotlight wasn't fixed on him the way it once was. He needed something big to push him into the next chapter. And then came Miss Universe 2015. It was December 20th, 2015. Millions of people were watching the Miss Universe pageant live from Las Vegas. Steve Harvey was the host. A big gig, but not one that people thought would define his entire career. For most of the night, things went smoothly. Steve was charming, funny, and professional. The kind of host you barely notice because everything is running so well. But then came the moment. The two finalists stood nervously on stage: Miss Colombia, Ariadna Gutierrez, and Miss Philippines, Pia Wurtzbach. Steve opened the card, looked at the names, and made an announcement that seemed ordinary at first. The new Miss Universe is Colombia. The arena exploded. Fireworks, confetti, tears of joy. Miss Colombia was crowned. She waved proudly as the world celebrated. And then, chaos. A few minutes later, Steve Harvey walked back on stage. His face looked tense. He held up the card, and with a shaky voice he said, "Okay, folks, I have to apologize. The first runner-up is Colombia. Miss Universe 2015 is actually Philippines." Silence, shock, gasps, confusion. Miss Colombia stood frozen, humiliated, the crown on her head about to be taken away. Miss Philippines, stunned, didn't know if she should walk forward. The crowd booed. Social media went insane. Steve Harvey had just made the biggest live TV mistake in modern history. The internet eruption within minutes, the mistake went viral. Memes flooded Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Late-night shows mocked him. Millions of people debated. How could he screw up something so simple? Some called it the worst hosting disaster ever. Others accused him of being careless, arrogant, or unprofessional. The backlash was brutal. Steve himself later admitted, "That night could have ended me. I thought my career was over, and in many ways it should have been. TV networks don't like mistakes, sponsors hate embarrassment, and fans are often unforgiving. But what happened next is what makes Steve Harvey's story one of the most fascinating tales of modern entertainment, because instead of destroying him, that mistake made him more famous than ever. The psychology of public mistakes. Why? Why didn't the world bury Steve Harvey after such a colossal blunder? The answer lies in psychology and in Steve's unique personality. First, the mistake was unforgettable. Everyone remembers where they were when they saw it. The image of Miss Columbia's crown being removed was burned into pop culture. Steve Harvey's name was suddenly on the lips of millions who never watched his sitcoms, never heard his radio shows, never saw his stand-up. He became instantly global. Second, Steve owned the mistake. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked back on stage, admitted the error, and took full responsibility. In an era where most celebrities deflect blame, his willingness to face humiliation made him oddly admirable. And third, the controversy gave him leverage. Networks realized that people couldn't stop talking about Steve Harvey. Whether they loved him or hated him, they were tuning in. And in television, attention is currency. The very next year, Steve Harvey was invited to host Miss Universe again. People thought it was a joke. How could they trust the guy who ruined it last time? But that's exactly why they brought him back. Because people wanted to see what would happen. Would he screw up again? Would he redeem himself? And just like that, Steve Harvey became a global figure. He wasn't just an American comedian anymore. He was an international name. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. They didn't always say comedian or Family Feud host. They said, that's the guy who messed up Miss Universe. But here's the catch. They were still talking about him. They were still paying attention. Steve Harvey turned a mistake into a masterclass in reinvention. He leaned into the controversy. He laughed at himself. He cracked jokes about the blunder on talk shows. He even used it in his comedy. Instead of letting the mistake define him negatively, he redefined the mistake. It wasn't a failure. It was proof that he was human, proof that he could bounce back, and audiences love a comeback story. Steve himself said, "My career took off again after that mistake. God had a plan." That single moment, which could have ended him, became the launch pad for a second career boom. His talk shows, radio programs, and international hosting gigs all benefited from the spotlight. And if you're enjoying this breakdown of how Steve Harvey turned humiliation into triumph, make sure you follow this channel right now, because the deeper we go, the crazier this story gets. After the Miss Universe blunder, Steve Harvey could have disappeared. Many in Hollywood thought he should. He had embarrassed an entire global stage, insulted a country that passionately supported Miss Columbia, and became the subject of endless internet ridicule. But instead of retreating, Steve stepped forward. He faced interviews. He went on his radio show and said, "Look, I made a mistake, but I won't let this mistake define me." He called it one of the hardest moments of his life, but also one of the most important. Most celebrities would have hidden for a year waiting for the internet to calm down. Steve Harvey did the opposite. He worked harder. The fallout wasn't just internet memes. It was international outrage. Colombia's government officials, celebrities, and fans lashed out at him. Death threats flooded his inbox. Social media campaigns called for his firing. People accused him of rigging the results, of being unprofessional, even of disrespecting Latin America. For Miss Colombia, Ariadna Gutierrez, the pain was unbearable. She said she felt humiliated, like she had been used as a prop in a cruel joke. She never forgave Harvey fully. This tension raised a serious question. How much damage is acceptable in the name of one man's redemption story? For critics, Steve Harvey was nothing more than a careless host whose career was saved because controversy sells. For supporters, he was proof that even at rock bottom, you can climb higher. And this clash between those who hated him and those who admired him kept his name alive in global headlines. Steve Harvey has always been outspoken about his belief in faith and destiny. In his books, in his speeches, in his shows, he repeats the same message. Your setback is a setup for your comeback. When Miss Universe happened, he turned that belief into reality. He framed the mistake not as an accident, but as divine design. He told audiences, "God let me fall on that stage so I could rise even higher." It's a controversial statement. Some call it inspirational, others call it arrogant. But whether you believe in divine intervention or not, the results were undeniable. Steve's visibility skyrocketed. His talk show ratings went up. Family Feud, the game show he had hosted since 2010, became more globally recognized because clips of Harvey circulated worldwide. Suddenly, his reactions, his humor, his personality weren't just for American audiences. They were viral in Asia, Africa, Europe, everywhere. What most people don't realize is that mistakes can be monetized. Steve Harvey didn't just survive the Miss Universe controversy, he turned it into a brand. His interviews about the blunder were some of the most watched segments on talk shows. His name boosted ticket sales for live events. And when he returned to host Miss Universe again in 2016, the ratings spiked. People tuned in just to see if he would mess up again. Networks noticed, sponsors noticed. Suddenly, Steve Harvey wasn't just a comedian or a talk show host, he was a media magnet. And this is where we hit another controversial truth. In the modern entertainment industry, failure isn't the opposite of success. Failure is success if you know how to spin it. And if you're fascinated by how one of the worst public screw-ups became a money-making empire, don't forget, follow this channel right now. We're just getting started, and you don't want to miss the twists ahead. Steve Harvey's reinvention wasn't only about media, it was about philosophy. Harvey began positioning himself as more than a comedian. He became a motivational speaker, a preacher of persistence, and a mentor figure. His books like Act Like a Success, Think Like a Success, and Jump sold massively, riding on the wave of his new global fame. People who once knew him as just a funny man now saw him as a man with wisdom. He began telling stories of his homelessness, how he once lived in his car for 3 years while chasing comedy gigs. He told stories about rejection, poverty, and perseverance. The Miss Universe moment gave these stories context, because audiences could now point and say, this is the guy who fell on the biggest stage and got back up. Maybe I can too. But not everyone was buying the inspiration. Critics saw it as calculated. They argued that Steve Harvey capitalized on humiliation. They said he turned someone else's pain, Miss Columbia's public embarrassment, into his profit. And this raises a powerful question. Is redemption always fair? Steve didn't suffer the worst of the mistake. Ariadna Gutierrez did. Yet it was Steve Harvey who got the book deals, the higher ratings, the global contracts. Was this resilience or exploitation? This question still sparks debates online. Every year, when Miss Universe rolls around, the clip resurfaces. Every time it does, people re-argue the morality of what happened. And every time, Steve Harvey's name stays relevant. One of the biggest beneficiaries of Steve's new fame was Family Feud. Clips of Steve Harvey's outrageous reactions, hilarious expressions, and unscripted comedy went viral on YouTube. Questions like, name something you stick in your mouth but don't swallow, would have Steve staring into the camera with disbelief, turning an ordinary game show into a comedy event. After Miss Universe, the show's global popularity exploded. Versions of Family Feud appeared in Africa, Asia, and Europe, often using Harvey's clips to attract viewers. In South Africa, Family Feud Africa launched with Steve himself as host, cementing his role as a truly international figure. This is where the brilliance of Harvey's comeback shines. He didn't just ride the wave of controversy, he expanded it into new markets, new opportunities, new empires. Of course, the bigger you become, the louder your critics get. Steve Harvey has been criticized for controversial comments about women, religion, and even politics. Some accuse him of being outdated, patriarchal, or hypocritical. But here's the thing. Controversy kept him alive. Every time someone disagreed with him, it fueled the cycle. Headlines kept him trending. Outrage kept him relevant. In modern entertainment, silence is death. But Steve Harvey has never been silent. Behind the jokes, the blunders, and the controversies, Steve Harvey often opens up about his vulnerabilities. He admits he cries often. He admits the Miss Universe mistake almost destroyed him emotionally. He admits that his career has been filled with anxiety, stress, and self-doubt. This vulnerability makes him relatable. People see a man who has money, fame, power, but who also stumbles, falls, and cries like anyone else. That humanity is what allows audiences to forgive him, even when he messes up. Steve Harvey's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Failure doesn't always end careers. Sometimes it makes them. And the reason is simple. Audiences don't connect with perfection. They connect with imperfection. They don't want flawless gods on TV. They want real people who make mistakes, own them, and keep going. That's why Steve Harvey survived. That's why his story inspires millions. That's why the Miss Universe mistake is remembered not as the end of his career, but as the rebirth of it. And if you're watching this and realizing how genius it is to turn embarrassment into opportunity, make sure to follow this channel right now, because we break down stories others are too scared to tell. By the late 2010s, Steve Harvey was no longer just a comedian or a talk show host. He had transformed into an empire. His brand stretched across radio, television, books, motivational speaking, and even international markets. His radio show, The Steve Harvey Morning Show, reached millions every day. His daytime talk shows brought in consistent audiences. His books became bestsellers, and Family Feud became one of the most viral shows in the world, thanks to clips flooding YouTube and social media. But Steve wasn't satisfied with just being a celebrity. He wanted to be a mogul. He launched the Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation, focusing on mentoring programs for youth. He entered business ventures, producing content, launching events, and expanding into Africa. From the outside, it looked like Steve Harvey was unstoppable. But behind the scenes, he faced constant criticism, new controversies, and the pressure of maintaining an empire built partly on one unforgettable mistake. Even years after 2015, Steve Harvey could not escape the Miss Universe shadow. Every time he walked on stage, there was always someone waiting to shout, "Don't read the wrong name, Steve!" Every time he hosted the pageant again, memes would resurface. For most celebrities, this would be a curse. But Harvey leaned into it. He joked about it on his shows. He made self-deprecating comments. He even used it in motivational speeches. If I can recover from that, you can recover from anything. This tactic kept him relevant. By controlling the narrative, he robbed critics of their power. What could they say about him that he hadn't already said himself? Steve Harvey's most famous motivational speech came when he told his audience about the importance of jumping. He said, "You have to jump. If you never jump, you'll never soar. Your parachute will never open if you don't jump." This became a rallying cry for millions of fans. It connected directly with his life story, leaving safe jobs, pursuing comedy, risking everything, failing publicly, and still rising. The Miss Universe disaster became the ultimate jump. He leapt into humiliation, and instead of crashing, he soared higher than ever. To his fans, this is proof of faith and resilience. To his critics, it's oversimplified motivational jargon. But either way, people kept talking about him. And that's the power he needed. But not all of Harvey's spotlight has been positive. He has faced backlash for comments about women, sometimes being accused of sexism. He was criticized for telling women in his book, "Act like a lady, think like a man to conform to."